I am Steel, mein Bianco. Nagimith Hello, welcome. We're really grateful to have you here. I don't think this is projecting very well. But I'm gonna eat the microphone. No. We're still all welcome here. Okay. We're really happy to see so many familiar faces and new faces. Thank you so much to the conference organizers for preparing this conference. Thank you for all of you who traveled to Denver to be here, for taking time and expense. And thank you for many of the people joining virtually. We're grateful to have you here, and we're grateful that you chose to be with us for this next hour. All right, I will speak more forcefully. The panel session that you're at today is called "What Difference Does It Make? Measuring and Communicating the Impact." As I said, I'm Steele Wagstaff from Pressbooks, and I'm joined by a really outstanding panel. TJ, if you advance to the next slide, you'll see everyone's face. I'll introduce them in turn. The two people joining us remotely, we have Stephanie Buck, who is the Director of Open Education Resources Unit at Oregon State University in Corvallis. We have TJ Bliss, who is now the Associate Commissioner for Academic Affairs for the Utah System of Higher Education. You might know him from other previous states and other previous roles. And then immediately to my right here, we have Abby Elder, who is the Open Access and Scholarly Communications Librarian and the Statewide Open Education Coordinator. She's at Iowa State University, great state of Iowa. And last but not least, further to my right, maybe on your left on video, is Virginia Clinton LaSalle, who is an Associate Professor of Education, Health, and Behavior at the University of North Dakota. And a semi-celebrity, if you call open education research, as you should. So as you can tell, we've got a really impressive panel. And what I've asked each of the panelists to do is to give a very brief sort of summary of like high-level efforts or initiatives that they've been involved with in terms of measuring impact of OER work they've been involved with at the institutional, the state, or the national or international level. And so we'll turn it to our first presenter, who will be Stephanie Buck. Stephanie, if you're ready to go, we can hear them, and we're ready to hear you.
Yes, I'm ready. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So thank you. Like I said, like Steele said, I'm Stephanie Buck. I'm the Director of Open Educational Resources at Oregon State University. And what you're seeing on the screen here right now is my Google Looker Studio data dashboard, which I created a number of years ago. This is a way for us to track on the institutional level things like savings and how many courses are low cost or no cost at our institution, how many students have been served by classes that offer low cost or no cost courses, those kinds of things. This is really for the impact, to help measure the impact at the institutional level. This is public, and I think that's really valuable and important for us, because it makes it not only transparent as to how we say, how much we've saved or how many students we've impacted, but also there's a level of accountability. I think that's very important when you make this available publicly. And of course, there are ways to filter this content, so colleges could look and see what their impact is, or how many low cost or no cost courses they've offered, those kinds of things. So it's pretty prominent on our website. I use this for things like quarterly reports and annual reports, which tend to be internal, but they do get shared out because my not direct supervisor, but the person who is in charge of the Division of Educational Ventures, where my unit resides, is also the vice provost. And so she has regular meetings with the provost and always asks for some data from the unit, the Open Educational Resources unit, that she can share with the provost. So, which is a really nice thing to be able to have, because she can then, bring that content to his attention. It's not always everything. Sometimes she just asks for 2 or 3 pithy bullet points, but this is the content that I can use to create that. I use this for stories, publications, marketing. Sometimes when we put out the call for proposals, reporting on grants, sometimes we share this information. But also there is a compliance aspect to this. We do have a legislative mandate, and every 2 years we have to share this information with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission in the state of Oregon. So that is kind of the way that we use this particular tool. And it's been super helpful, and it's been very informative because I can share this with different people depending on their backgrounds and interests, and again narrow it down to different colleges or different time periods, and that's been very helpful. Next slide, please. So we also, in addition to our institutional data dashboard, we have what we call the data dashboard for each individual OER textbook that we publish. And this is an example of one of our bestsellers, Anatomy and Physiology. Can tell that that's a Pressbook page there, but we have this at the bottom. We have these two links. One is the data dashboard, and the other is the adoption form. And the data dashboard is something that was also designed. Okay, I cannot take credit for it. It was created by the director of the unit, Mark Lane, but I'm the one who told him to do it. So therefore, I feel appropriate, that is appropriate for me to use the royal we and take some credit for this. But anyway, this has been extremely helpful and super popular with our faculty. So it shows the impact more on an individual level. Faculty have used this to gain some recognition. So for example, faculty have used it and again, the whole idea of OER and promotion and tenure has been a little bit tricky, but they can still use this to say, hey, look, I wrote this textbook, and see how the impact has been international, literally international, all over the world. They can see how book chapters have been used. It helps them sometimes when they apply for update grants to say, oh, these are the chapters that haven't been used. Maybe we need to take a look at those and revise those. So there are a lot of different ways that they use this information. I use it for when I'm nominating faculty for awards, or when I'm updating grants, or they're asking for update grants. I look to see, how's the textbook been used. We use it for stories. So there's a lot of different ways to use it. And the adoption form has also been really beneficial for the faculty. This is voluntary. Any instructor who wants to use it is able to fill that in. It's just a Google form that we threw on there. But knowing that, for example, and I'm not bragging here, but Harvard and Oxford are on the adoption page is kind of cool. I mean, that I got to tell you, when I said that got the ears of the vice provost perked up immediately or the provost when I mentioned that. So these are just little things that you can use to say, hey, look at this. It's not just us. There's a whole international group that's using this. And Amber, yes, happy to do that. Call me wherever you are. Okay, so. And then the last slide I wanted to share, because I only have 3 minutes and it's really hard, is we did the Florida survey, and I imagine people know about the survey that was done by the Florida Virtual Campus in 2016, which is the one that said, hey, 60% of the students aren't purchasing their textbooks. We've run that survey here at Oregon State. We just ran it again recently. There's some absolutely fabulous information and data that comes out of doing these surveys. It's a lot of work. But it's also super, super useful when trying to get that story, right? So I use it. I have a report that I'm working on. There's executive summaries that go out. We share those with the colleges. So your college reported X. I use it when I go to college and departmental visits to talk up the OER grants or open education stuff that we're doing. Hey, did you know that your students are worried about the cost of textbooks? And we post it on our website. We make blog posts and other marketing tools. Again, it's a lot of work, but it can really help bring that story to life. And so there are many institutions that have run this or a similar survey. The Florida survey has kind of morphed over time, which is great. And I think it's really useful as a way to set a benchmark, and then also just go out and share out what you're finding. And the student voice, I think, is a really, really important part of all of this, obviously, because that's why we do it, right? For the students. So yes, I can repost. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, thank you, Stephanie, really appreciate that. The way that we'll structure this now is, it is a bit unjust to ask each person just to have 3 minutes for their initial share, but we're gonna have them do the quick initial share, and then we'll take time to expand on, we'll have a conversation and then take Q&As to expand on things. So the intention will be like some quick hits now, and then we'll dive in a little deeper in our panel conversation next. Stephanie was the first presenter, and we're gonna go next to TJ Bliss, who's also joining us remotely. TJ, if you're willing to unmute and let us know what you'd like to share in your 3 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry I can't be there with you in person in Denver. I actually was there Sunday and Monday. So if you saw me wandering around the lobby, it wasn't a ghost, but I had to get back to Utah to spend time with my family. I'm going to just, my approach to and my involvement in measurement of the impact of OER has been at a different level than at an institution or building dashboards. I say a lot less practical, but maybe building the environment and ecosystem for measurements. So this is a terrible attempt at using AI to create an image of David Wiley and me, and a movie I've never seen before. But I was involved in developing the coup framework back in, 2012, 2013. I can tell you the story sometime over dinner if you'd like. It's a very short story that involved a whiteboard and a 10-minute conversation. So it's been obviously built upon and improved, this framework, but it still is a meaningful framework, I think, for thinking about OER impact on cost, outcomes, uses, and perceptions. And I've also been involved my time at the Hewlett Foundation in supporting a lot of incredible efforts. I see people in this Zoom room who are involved in this work or on this panel as well. I'm looking at you, Beck, and those in England, but others as well. Including Bayview Analytics, who run the OER survey every year. I'll come back to that at the end. The GoGN network, which is an awesome network of PhD researchers from around the world. I did work at Wiki Education for 3 years, and there's a lot of measurement there. I invite you to go look at their dashboards. There's some incredible dashboards on the impact of open educational practice. And then the Achieving the Dream grant, which was the OER degree grant you may be familiar with, had a $3 million research portion to it. Which was pretty incredible to have that built in from the beginning. So there are a lot of research reports about the impact of OER degrees that come out of that work. And then, of course, the Open Education Research Fellows, of which Virginia was one. I don't know, probably others in this room have been as well, where there's a lot of impact being measured there. Currently, I have this here as well. To say that currently I'm working with Bayview Analytics and a few others to develop a framework for international research to look at the impact of the UNESCO OER recommendation. So that's some high-level work that I've done in the past and that I'm currently working on right now.
Thank you, TJ. Really appreciate that. I'm going to pass the microphone just to my right now, and we're going to hear from Abby Elber next.
All right, hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm going to talk really quickly about the 3 levels at which we assess data and the impact of OER across my work. The first is at the state level. So each year across the state of Iowa, we run an annual survey asking, do you have an OER initiative? Who's involved? Who runs it? How many people do you support? How many students are supported through this work? And what sorts of pieces do you have in your program? Do you have grants? Do you have a committee? Do you have other pieces to this work? And we have a data dashboard where we showcase that, as well as our annual reports that come out to say, okay, here's what it looks like across our state, whether people have support for OER and how much that affects the actual impact of the work. For those that don't have any initiatives, they're going to have less people adopting these materials, less students affected, less saving. For people that do have support available, depending on whether they have a committee, grants, infrastructure of some sort, they're going to have different outcomes. So that's one level at which we look at this work. On the next slide, I talk a little bit about the institutional level. So this is a preview of a not yet released data dashboard for our institution on the total cost of course materials for every section of every course. We are going to have it broken down by college, programmed, course, and individual section to see, does this course have no cost textbooks, under $50, over $50, or no text required? So we can get an idea of actually how much does it actually cost our students to get a degree in some of these programs across our institution? How much does it actually cost when we're looking at these different affordability initiatives, and where is the most impact coming through? So we can see, for example, if you were to drill down into ag and life sciences, that agronomy has all of the OER at our institution. But it's a small little band of red compared to the 166 sections of over $50 textbooks. Next, looking at the individual level, is the final piece I'm going to talk a little bit about later, which is just we also use the lovely dashboards provided by Oregon State. I got some training from them on how to build something like this a couple of years ago. And so we use Google Analytics and Looker Studio to have track dashboards for our own books published in press books. So the ISU Digital Press will track downloads, page views, users, and where they're coming from for our books. And one thing we particularly track is the referring web page. So we can see, for example, are there 5,000 users coming from SUNY? Are there 50 users coming from the Blackboard for a specific university? That way we can see, oh, there's probably someone actually adopting and using these books in our courses. So this helps us track things like adoptions, related work, and also we can see if there's a lot of traffic coming from the open textbook library. Maybe we should check and see if there's a new review. But we're going to get into next. Virginia's amazing.
All right, thank you so much. So if you, oh, you're already there. So I want to start by talking about a framework that I developed along with Jasmine Roberts-Cruz and Lindsay Gavoshe on that we termed the scope framework. And this is where we built on some of the important work that PJ and David and others did with the COOP framework, and added in elements and integrated various theories into it. If you're interested in learning more about this, it is published in Erodal, open access, and it's also on the Open Ag website. So when you're conducting research in open education, a lot of times it can be difficult to think of where to even start. And this is a general path, which makes it sound so simple, right? Just do these steps and you can have high impact research. But this is ultimately the path that I found to be most effective, is you start with a curiosity or observation. So I'm doing these changes to my class where I'm integrating open pedagogy. How does that change relate to something I care about? Student learning, student motivation, sense of belonging, social justice opportunities, and then go and develop a research question based on it. And that research question should be built on work from the past, but address gaps or resolve conflict that's in that current work. So you want to have some kind of background, some kind of footing. We suggest a lot of theoretical frameworks in the scope framework to help give some suggestions for open education research. It's by no means comprehensive. It's just some helpful guides. So then reflect, what data do I have available and what do I know how to analyze? It won't do you any good to have a pile of data that you can't make sense of. And I know a lot of times that happens with the best of intentions. And I've been brought on to projects where I'm given data and I'm just like, what were you thinking you were going to find with this? And just not being able to make sense of it. So you have to begin with the end in mind. How are you going to answer your question? And then from that backwards design approach, come up with your data collection plan. And be realistic. You know, if you've got a class of 30 students doing an experimental design where you have students randomly assigned into groups and comparing the group, that's not going to be. You know, think of what you could do, something descriptive, something more inquiry-based, more qualitative. That would be better suited. Similarly, if you have 500 students, you probably don't want to interview all of them. Right. So realistic, that goes along with the available data and analysis tools. Don't tell yourself you're going to learn a new software unless you really do plan on learning that software. Because it's usually very hard to learn research software in my in my personal experience. For example, I use RStudio under duress. I will use it. I've written, managed to publish and write code and all that, but if I can use simpler software, I do. And then share broadly. And obviously, I don't need to tell you all about the importance of having your work be as openly available as possible. I realize there are constraints on that. But if you do have any way to put it on your scholarly commons at your institution, to share it on Open Science Framework, which is not science, means any kind of research or scholarship very broadly, it's humanities too. Do so. Find ways where anyone with internet access can reach your work. And I also encourage social media use. You don't have to be on TikTok. I'm on TikTok, at least for now. I keep going back. Anyway, here's an example on the next slide of an application of that scope framework that I talked about. This was a study I presented last year at Open Education. That article is available there if you're curious, where we surveyed 1,000 college students about having to purchase an access code to do their homework. And then we organized our question and our findings based on the scope framework. As you can see on the next slide, we looked at social justice issue by focusing on first generation students, because those students are historically underserved. And we found that there was disproportionate negative impact of the cost of doing homework in terms of this is one thing that surprised me, they were more likely to be assigned homework they had to pay for, first generation students. Yeah. So I'm guessing it's targeted marketing for campuses and courses that serve those students. Anyway, and then unfortunately they had more unwanted effects, more problems with their grades, dropping a class, failing a course, that sort of.
Thank you so much. We're going to try to move to this mic. Hopefully that is better audio here. Thank you for the suggestion in the chat. I'm sorry it took us a while to get there. What we've done is in 20 minutes, I think your minds have been blown. You've seen high level, powerful examples from really interesting practitioners. And what we want to do is move to a bit of a moderated Q&A. I've got some questions prepared for the panel. We'll try to take these briefly as well. And then we would love to hear from those of you in the audience that have specific questions about measuring or communicating impact at your institutions. So the first question, just generally for the panel, anyone who'd like to take this is welcome. I'd like you to tell us, the audience, a bit more about how you identify or identified who the key audiences or stakeholders are for the open education work that you're doing, and what steps you could take to better understand their desires or their priorities. So how do you identify the audience or the stakeholder and figure out what matters to them, I suppose, is the question. If you're in the room and want to answer, we'll use this one. Okay. Abby, you want to answer?
I'll go first. I think the biggest thing for me in thinking about audiences and who we actually reach, and I'm going to make sure that I am speaking into the mic, thank you everybody online for being patient, is we ran an institutional SWOT analysis, actually, just think about what are the threats to the work that we do, where are the opportunities, where are the weaknesses, and we realized, oh, there are people we're not talking to right now. There are people who have a say in how we talk to brand new students and new faculty, who have a say in how people get onboarded to their careers at our university, who don't know that OER is a thing we do, that this is a priority for the institution, despite it being on our strategic plan, which is cool. But if no one knows, it doesn't mean anything. So getting out there and finding those people who have the opportunity to support us, who are currently sort of the weakness in our marketing strategy, was a big part of getting in touch with more people. But in order to find those people in the first place, I also had to ask not myself. So it was going out to people in our Center for Learning and Teaching, going out to people in financial aid and saying, who here doesn't know what I do? And do you want to hear about it? And do you know anybody else who maybe would want to hear about this as well that I'm not already in touch with? Because I can't know everything and I can't know everyone, but I can ask the people I do know, to get me in touch with more people that would be useful and good connections to have. So identifying those people sometimes isn't about knowing who they are. It's about knowing who you know and asking them for the extra piece out from there.
Stephanie or TJ, either of you want to talk about who writes the checks or the money side of things?
Yeah, I can jump in for a second and just say, in my career, my key audience has often been a board of some sort, whether that's the Hewlett Foundation board or the other boards I've worked for. But I think in any situation we're in, we do have those people who enable the work to happen in one way or another through policy or funding, through prioritization, through strategy. And so, the work that I've spent, the time that I've spent in this field has been really focused on helping those folks try to understand why they should care about OER, why they should care about affordable learning materials and the whole space when they're thinking about often much bigger things in their mind, like state budgets or, housing or, things that are just sometimes to them much bigger. So how do you make this a priority is sort of been the work that I've been focused on.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was one of the revealing takeaways, just hearing the keynote this morning from the governor of the state of Colorado. The point that he chose to mention in the data metrics that mattered to him, I could say, oh, that's an audience that's different from many of the audiences we work with. And if I'm communicating there, here are the points I want to hit. And I guess I want to ask about impact a little bit here, which is, I want to draw from something that you said, Virginia, and also Abby, when you talked about, okay, here's 3 different levels that I'm working in. And you mentioned when I'm designing a project, being realistic and being aware of like, what's the level of impact that we want to measure? So we can measure impact at the level of course, a textbook itself, a program, or even a whole state in some cases. How do you decide what level of impact to highlight for a given audience? And how do you avoid overwhelming people with too much data or information when you're telling your impact story, you have so much you want to convey? Yeah, you're ready. I
can tell you that the honest answer of how I determine my level of analysis, it's based on the data I have.
Okay, that's good.
If I have a data set from a state initiative, then I'm looking at the state level. And if I have institutional data, or if I have course data, it depends on the data that I have available. I mean, the broader I can go, I'll go to as the maximum of my limits, so to speak. And then as far as like what to focus on, this is something that I've learned when giving presentations, especially because, with the research article, you can give lots and lots of detail, but most people are not going to sit down and read a research article. So if I do something, I try to just really focus on what are the highlights and what is the most relevant to that population. So if I'm talking to policymakers, I'm going to emphasize the cost savings, and I'm going to emphasize the reduction in withdrawal rates that we've seen. Because that is something that really grabs them, because I don't think that the potential cost savings through reduced withdrawal rates is something that really is an obvious benefit to this. If I am talking more to other instructors, I tend to talk more about things like student motivation and sense of belonging, and how one thing I said is, I did a workshop for instructors, and this was when ChatGPT was coming out, and there was a lot of concerns about cheating, was that when students care and they see a purpose in an assignment, they are much less likely to cheat. And that's something that we find over and over again in the research literature, because it's not like cheating's new.
So other thoughts about the level of impact conversation or choice that panelists would like to share?
Especially Stephanie, you haven't had a chance yet.
Well, I was going to say, I think Virginia has hit it. It really depends on what you have and who you're talking to. But to me, one of the things that I think is really important is that you have a nice balance of both the quantitative and the qualitative content. Yes, sometimes cost savings will speak more to a certain group of people, but if I only share that one side of it, hey, we save the student, or students are being asked to pay, X number of dollars per year for their course materials. That doesn't necessarily resonate with them without the story of, yes, $500 a year is not very much when you look at the big picture, the drop in the bucket, tuition, all those kinds of things. But you pair that with a story of a student who says, yes, my tuition is paid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But once I do these other things, I got zero left for the textbooks, right? I'm at the limit. I'm at my limit. Those two things together can be super powerful. But again, choosing those to really target what your audience is interested in, I think, is a really good point that Virginia made, and can be a little tricky sometimes. Different audiences have different interests.
So I maybe have a follow-up question on that, because I think, especially when you were beginning in doing quantitative data analysis, we sometimes forget that there's a set of choices even in how the data arrives to us. So for example, there are things that are
Bill,
easy
can you
to
speak straight into the microphone, please?
Yes, thank you. There are things that are easy to measure, and then there are things that are meaningful to measure. Right? And we've all felt the tension between, oh, we've got a lot of data, but it's not as meaningful as the data that we wish we had. Can you share an example of a metric that you either stopped using or one that you adopted that shifted the way you communicate impact because you felt it was either more or less meaningful, aside from the question of availability?
Are you asking me, or are you asking everybody?
Yes, please. I'm gonna ask anyone who cares to answer, I suppose, but
Well, okay,
I wasn't
so
trying to
we
target you,
just
Stephanie, but
that's
please,
okay.
yes.
We just did, like I said, we just did the Florida survey, as people like to call it again. And we did actually change some questions and drop some questions. Like I argued, I was working with some colleagues, and I argued, like, why are we asking the students how much they spent? This is based on memory, right? Does this help? If I tell faculty, hey, the students reported spending X number of dollars on their, it's like, yeah, and do they remember what they had for dinner last night? Probably not. So how reliable is that? But then we also added some questions that were relevant to us. What does it mean to be low cost or no cost? Because that's a state mandate, right? So things that we have added that are meaningful and will be meaningful to report out. Maybe more so than things like, I think I spent X number of dollars on, textbooks or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, but I think that's one of the powerful things about using something like the survey that most of us have openly licensed, is as you can build on it and you can improve it, right?
I wanna just-
Go ahead, Ed.
You go ahead, TJ.
I just want to add really quickly. One of the easiest things to measure is awareness. Awareness of OER. Well, I mean, it's not super easy, because once you say OER, then you taint the survey. But still, I've often wondered, even though it's a thing we've been measuring for a long time, and I've given grants to measure this thing, I have wondered, how valuable is awareness compared to other things that we could measure. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't have an answer for it. It's just something that I've wondered about, and would love to hear other panelists' thoughts on the awareness question.
Oh, boy. Well, I can't answer that one, but I can answer a metric we wanted to use, but in the process of thinking about how we would get it, we decided it was not worth the trouble, which is we wanted to assess the amount of people using OER in any capacity in any of our courses. However, what we found is we can assess people who are using open textbooks. We can assess people who have replaced all of their course materials with OER, but people using open videos, people using open slide decks, people using different types of OER across their course in conjunction with commercial materials, either don't know they're using OER at all, they just know I found this free thing online, it's really cool, I love it. Or they know they're using OER, but they don't want to report it because it's not a ZTC course. It's just a course that uses OER with commercial materials. So we end up with no way of getting complete data of actually the amount of people using OER in all of its different ways.
Hmm.
It was cool to try to get the data, but in the process, we learned actually there is maybe 3 to 4 times more people using OER than we actually know.
I want to just emphasize the value of learning from failed experiments. Like that's anybody that does research realizes you learn a lot from failed experiments, especially if you're willing to share your failed findings or your null findings. So anything that you wanted to add on that question, Virginia, before I take the mic away?
No, you can
Okay.
go on.
So,
Stephanie's unmuted.
oh, Stephanie, please.
Oh, I was just agreeing with that. It's been really when we redid the survey just recently, we had a huge discussion about, what do we mean by course materials even? I mean, even that is hard to define. So some of those things can be just really complex once you start digging into them. But I would love to hear Virginia's take on anything that has to do with research because, she's the queen. So.
Well, so maybe this is
Steele, before you move off that question, can I just add a little bit?
TJ, right? I heard a voice, but I didn't know. Yes, please. Yes, please.
You can hear me. Okay. Now I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. I mean, even just building off of what Abby said, I found in at least at the state level and the government level, when you think about what politicians want to hear, or boards or governors or those folks, OER is not really something they're all that interested in. They're much more interested, at least here in the United States, where cost is a big factor. They're interested in that very low cost, affordable learning material question, where OER is a part of the answer to that solution, but not the whole thing. And so what we measure is really driven by that interest. And it becomes less interesting to know, well, was that course OER or was it just, less than $20? So that's just something we're grappling with.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. So the follow-up question, I guess, is what are some common mistakes or pitfalls that you think people make early in their efforts to either measure or communicate the impact that their projects have had? And what advice would you give to newcomers so that they could learn from some failed experiments or failed efforts that you've either made or seen others make as they try to do this from the start? Maybe we'll start with
Sure.
Virginia.
Well, as far as communicating, I think the most important thing to remember is that other people aren't in your head with you. And even though you've been eating, sleeping, breathing this project for so long, a lot of times people will just kind of start in the middle of their project and forget that you weren't there the other people weren't there for the beginning. And they have no idea what you're talking about. The other is, we have a certain academician way of speaking for journal articles, which is good and fine for journal articles, but to be sure to use plain language that is communicable across disciplines and backgrounds so that your findings can have wide support and getting it out for the public is just so crucial, especially with a lot of the scrutiny we're under these days. So that's one. As far as failed experiments, I'm from a field in psychology that's notorious for hiding its null results. And I would say my favorite thing, what truly converted me to open education and make it my research focus was when I was talking about working on my meta-analysis on open textbook adoption, and people were, saying like, well, where are you at and all this? And I was saying like, oh, well, hopefully the results are flattering. They're like, well, if they're not, we need to know. And that just floored me because I come from a field where it's like, oh, if those results make somebody look bad or if their theory isn't square, you do not share them. So that's, this is a very welcoming field as far as publishing honest data.
Join us tonight at 9 for Virginia's thoughts on the education crisis. Other thoughts on that question about
Other thoughts on that question? Stephanie, I see you're unmuted.
I agree. I think it's a very welcoming field, and I do think it's really important that we are honest about when things are not going our way or when we're not seeing in issues or concerns, and it's like, oh, that's this. I say this because I go to my colleagues who are, you know, researchers, and say, I need bad news. I need to know that students are suffering, right? Because that's going to get me the money. And they always laugh at me. I think we should celebrate the wins too.
I like that, Stephanie, because that leads into what I wanted to ask next. And the thing we've heard a lot about, that you'll hear about at every open education conference, is money and cost savings. And that is an important goal for many people, and money does matter. You've heard it from the students on their panel. But we all know that many people in this field, most of you probably didn't come to this room because you're like, you know what? I really want to do something about money. Like, it really is, a lot of the work in open education is motivated and will be motivated by equity and access goals. So what approaches have you all found effective for measuring and communicating impacts that go beyond cost savings? Whether it's student success, inclusion and belonging, even if they're banned in your state, or even just rejuvenating instructors who feel burned out or cynical about the profession. Those are still impact stories and part of the open education journey. So I'd love to hear some thoughts about initiatives or efforts or things that you feel are meaningful in those monetary cost measurement hypotheses.
I can take first stab if you'd like, Steele. So I spent, so I always love to highlight the work that Wiki Education does because of how well they measure their impact, and it has nothing to do with cost savings. It was one of the reasons I actually went to work for them after I left the Hewlett Foundation, because I really liked that kind of approach, and it's really about the impact on students, and you can actually see the work that the contributions that they make to open knowledge and to open content. And there are lots of fun dashboards to go look at. So if you've never been, I'll put the link in the chat here, but if you've never looked at the Wiki Education dashboards and look at the actual impact that students are having on Wikipedia itself, in the world, in multiple languages, on equity topics, as well as a whole range of other topics, it's pretty phenomenal and pretty fascinating. And I love how they approach their measurement work, particularly not just to show impact to funders, but to show impact to the community that they're a major part of, and that's the Wikipedian community as well. So it's just one point to highlight, and it was one of the reasons I loved working there and contributing that way.
I will pick up after this 1 minute. Okay, speaking in the microphone. Another thing that I like to pick out aside from cost savings is thinking about what can I highlight if the cost savings don't sound exciting. So I'm sure we've all had the situation, you're talking to an administrator and they say, well, this other program we did saved this much money. This other thing we did helped this many people. Yours doesn't look that cool in comparison. And so you have to find the other ways to communicate that information, why it matters. Sometimes it's, well, this didn't just save students this much money, this supported 9,000 students. That's a third of our student body. A third of our student body didn't have to worry about textbook costs over this many semesters. That means that they had the time and the effort and the ability to get groceries, to not worry about their courses, to get access to their materials. Similarly, if I'm talking to an instructor and I'm like, okay, the data is not great right now for your book. It's got some views, it's got some downloads, but it has a review in the open textbook library. I can say, hey, another instructor at another institution read your book. They had some really nice things to say. Here's some quotes you can put in your promotion and tenure evaluation. Here's some things that you can think about of what could be updated for the next edition. And then finally, probably my favorite story regarding this is when we presented to our legislature and our Board of Regents about OER, we didn't talk about, oh, here's the big number. We said, there is a student at one of our community colleges, Northeast Iowa Community College, who was able to get his associate's degree in business administration after getting out of prison. He got his degree because it's a Z degree at that community college, and he was able to get through all of his courses without paying a single dime for textbooks, and now he has a small business. And this was possible because the investment that institution had in OER. And it's the only Z degree we had in our entire state, but he had access to those opportunities. And that resonated with people because they saw, oh, that's my constituents, that's the people I care about that I want to support. And so that's a way you can connect with people besides that bulk number.
Thank you. I think the storytelling has been touched on here. I think telling stories that are authentic and meaningful to us is an important strategy. The last big question I want to ask is, each of you have been working in this field for many years. If you imagine the next, say, 5 years of measuring impact in open education, what do you hope we'll be doing different? We're supposed to be thinking about the horizon of this conference. So what changes do you see with how we could or should measure impact in the open education movement?
I can throw something out there, and I would love to hear TJ and Virginia's thoughts on this. Because I've been thinking about this. We're working on micro credentials here at Oregon State. Many people are. And one of the things about micro credentials is they have very specific skills, right? So you get badged for being able to do X, Y, Z. Is there a way that we can figure out what the skills are or the strengths are that students learn or get by participating in or just having, the open education, the free text, or whatever it happens to be, that takes us beyond graduation? And I don't know what that would be and how we would do that. That's why that's why TJ and Virginia are here, because they know these things. But that, I mean, to me, that seems like that would be like the next big step if we could figure that out. I don't have any good answers though. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there for, devil's advocate.
Well, I'll say something uninspiring and then Virginia can clean up the mess. And that is that I don't know that we should expect anything different in terms of skills development by just using OER, unless you're using that OER in a very particular way. So I go back to the wiki education example. I know there are skills that students gain in terms of information literacy, and I mean there's writing, of course, and communication. But the information literacy, being able to understand how knowledge is created and what makes something true, that's something you get if you're actually responsible for creating new knowledge, right? And one way to do that is through open pedagogy. But just using an open textbook from OpenStax versus a Pearson or whatever textbook, I would hope there wouldn't be any difference. In fact, we would look for no difference in the skills. They should be focused on whatever they're supposed to be learning in terms of skills and content. So I think it's an interesting question. That's my first response and first thought. It depends on how you're using the content, not just that the content is open.
Yeah, related to that, actually, I was going to say I would like to see more development in how open pedagogy relates to learning and looking at how we can measure learning in an effective and meaningful way. It is really hard to measure learning, and that's not just something in open education, that's education broadly. We tend to use the measures we use because they're reliable or they're quote unquote objective, even though nothing is actually objective. But so that is one area where I'd love to see more inquiry. I'd also love to see doubling down on our commitment to equity and access and holding strong to those and showing commitment to those and having evidence of is this work we're doing in open pedagogy specifically, we've got a good amount of evidence with OER and historically underserved groups. We could use more, but I think, really, does open pedagogy open up social justice avenues that we're not going to see otherwise, that can really have unique ways for students to learn in meaningful ways?
On that, I'm supposed to be the moderator, so I'm not going to share my opinion on many things, but I can't resist. So on the question of media studies, we know like replacing content with other content has almost no impact on learning across the board. There's many studies that have told us that again. We're unlikely to find meaningful difference there. But there are studies that say things that do impact learning are it's instructional design decisions, pedagogical, the way you structure your course, the activities you ask students to do. Something that I would be really interested to see, and I don't know, this may already exist, I'm not as well versed in the scholarship, would be what are the longitudinal effects over time if a student is involved in a meaningful open pedagogy project early in their education? What impact does it have on their choice of major? What impact does it have on their later engagement in that discipline or that field of study? Because I can think anecdotally, having participated in those projects, there's a lot of like activation events. When you are more actively involved in creating knowledge in that field, you suddenly become interested in chemistry in a way that you may not have been when you were just taking the quiz in the midterm. People do support what they help create, I think anecdotally. And it'd be really interesting to see the impact of open pedagogy or pedagogy projects on, say, more longer term effect on student decisions about majors. I don't know how to design that experiment, but I would be really curious to see what open pedagogy impacts have over time. That would be one thing. We're about at 5 minutes here, and we'd like to open it up for any questions that are burning in you. You in the audience, virtually, or the chat has been really great on Zoom, and I see a hand over here. We'd love to take your question. Marcus, can you bring the mic over there? Thank you.
Hi, question probably more geared towards staff and you guys made those dashboards, state and
You're welcome.
level ones, and I'm wondering, how did you get the data to input into?
Hi.
dashboards
Can we do
and
two slices, 2 plain slices? Thanks.
Gina, you're unmuted on accident. If you're willing to mute yourself, sorry.
And were the institutions that got that data from, were they already doing course marking? Is course marking needed first to get that data? And if not, how are we getting that data?
I'll start, Stephanie, thank you. So for us, we do not do course marking in any way. So we're just very lucky. I guess we have our bookstore represented on our OER committee on campus. They get 80% of reporting in for their textbook reporting, which they say is really good, and I believe them based on other people in the comments. So we get really good data on what people are using their courses early on in the semester. And that helps us get an idea of, just what people are using for their textbooks in the first place, which we can then build upon. I mentioned in the chat for those who are online, who already saw it, that we amplify that with, okay, this person used to use OER and they submitted that they're not using any books this year. Let me reach out and ask, did they just not tell the bookstore because they didn't want to work with them? Let me reach out to this person who says they've never used a book before and ask, are you really not using a book? Or are you using a book that you think doesn't count? And that's the way that we try to help fill those gaps so we can get more accurate data to put into that reporting.
And the second question also related to the creation of those dashboards. How did you get that funded? And who needs to be on a team for that kind of project to get implemented and executed?
I'll leave that to Stephanie because I don't have funding and I just make it work myself.
Ditto. We just did it. I'm super fortunate that my assistant director is a genius and makes me look good. So yeah, I mean, it's work, but it's not like, you can probably figure it out. There are different, tools out there. There's AI now, yay. So there's different ways that you can do that. I think the hardest part is getting the actual data, right? Then creating the dashboard maybe is not quite as tricky. And there's tools out there that can help you with that. It's getting the data. So that would be, I think, the first step.
There was also a question in the chat, and so I can just speak for Pressbooks, but many other platforms would be similar. With Pressbooks, there's an optional Google Analytics integration. If you turn it on, it will send page view information to Google. It's stored on Google servers, and then it's yours to do with and visualize as you see fit. We also provide a built-in integration with an open source tool called Cocoa Analytics, which does not send any data to third parties. It just stores it in the database. So you can measure page views, referrers, and file download events there, and then we make that available at the network level. So you have the raw data that you can then choose to visualize. There's a bunch of people in the community. We have a forum where you can ask some questions about that if that's the platform you're using. Other platforms will be different, and I can't speak for them, but I know the Manifold, the Reflex, and other folks are here. If those platforms are important to you, you can talk with them about how to measure that in those platforms.
So if you hate Google, you don't have to use Google Analytics.
True. I think we have time for maybe one final question. I don't know if someone in the chat was trying to ask something earlier. We can't take your orders, but we can answer them. It did sound good though, whatever you. One more, please.
Still, I think Stephanie and I have been having a conversation in the chat with folks. So
Okay, thank you for monitoring that for us. Okay. Well, we want to say what we're going to do is we're going to end now and appreciate your time. If you have any questions for any of us, if you go to the last slide, TJ, there's contact information. We'll share the slides on the website soon. We're happy to answer questions in person or remotely. Thanks for your time and your attention. Be present.